There are moments in the grand, sweeping narrative of the royal family that feel scripted by history itself, a perfect collision of duty and destiny. And then there are moments that arrive like a sudden, brilliant flash of lightning, illuminating a future no one saw coming. This is the story of one such moment. It begins not with a trumpet fanfare, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere at Windsor. The late summer sun was casting long, honey-colored shadows across the polo fields, and the air was thick with the scent of cut grass and the murmur of a crowd expecting nothing more than a pleasant afternoon. They were there for a charity match, a familiar ritual of royal life, and their eyes were naturally drawn to the players, the thundering of hooves on turf. But on this day, all of that energy, all of that pageantry would become a mere backdrop. A car pulled up, unremarkable in its quiet elegance, and a young woman stepped out. She was not a stranger, but the figure she presented was entirely new. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The polite applause faltered, replaced by a collective, sharp intake of breath. Who was this poised, enigmatic presence whose very silence seemed to command the attention of the entire world, and what seismic shift had just occurred that would leave an entire nation and a king utterly stunned? To understand the profound weight of that moment, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of the transformation, we must first travel back to a very different kind of quiet. We must go back to a chilly November evening in 2003 to Frimley Park Hospital in Surrey. The air outside was crisp, carrying the murmur of a nation holding its breath, but inside, under the sterile, unforgiving lights of a delivery room, a different kind of storm was raging. Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, was fighting a battle that would forever define the fragile miracle of this new life. The royal family had gathered, their faces etched with a carefully masked anxiety, a lineage suspended in a moment of profound crisis. The baby, a girl, was arriving a month early, and she was arriving in peril. The umbilical cord, her lifeline, was wrapped tightly around her neck, cutting off her oxygen supply. It was a silent, terrifying emergency, a race against time that stripped away all the protocol and privilege, leaving only the raw, primal fear of two parents about to lose their child. Prince Edward, his face a mask of barely controlled terror, was present, a witness to the desperate, urgent ballet of doctors and nurses as they fought to coax a first breath from his daughter. For 9 agonizing minutes, there was only silence and the frantic, focused energy of the medical team. A life that was meant to be cradled in velvet, and history began not with a cry, but with a fight for its very existence. This dramatic, terrifying entrance into the world would become the cornerstone of an extraordinary life, a prelude that foretold not a fragile princess in a tower, but a quiet warrior whose very first act was resilience. That resilience was the first gift she was given, but it was her parents who would carefully, deliberately construct the world in which it could flourish. The Countess of Wessex, a woman who had risen from a commoner in a public relations firm to the vertiginous, often cruel, spotlight of royal life, possessed a steely core of pragmatism. She had been burned by the spotlight. Her early years in the firm, marred by tabloid stings and whispered comparisons, she could never win. She knew, with a bone-deep certainty, what a life lived under a magnifying glass could do to a soul. And for her daughter, she wanted none of it. The decision she and Edward made was, in its own quiet way, a radical one. They would not raise a princess. They would raise a person. While the world became obsessed with the pageantry surrounding their nephews and niece, the children of the Prince and Princess of Wales, a different kind of childhood was unfolding in the tranquil, leafy embrace of Bagshot Park. It was a childhood of muddy Wellington boots by the back door, of secret dens built in the vast private woods, and of a deliberately ordinary rhythm of school runs, homework, and family dinners. The entire machinery of the monarchy seemed to bend around this one small family's desire for normalcy. There were no major balcony appearances at Buckingham Palace to wave at the adoring crowds, no staged photo calls that might turn the child into a national obsession before she could even speak. Instead, there was the clatter of hooves and the smell of hay, as the girl, named Louise Alice Elizabeth Mary Mountbatten Windsor, discovered a profound love for horses, a passion she shared with her late grandmother, the Queen, and her grandfather, Prince Philip. It was in the stables that the values of her quiet, almost invisible royal life were forged not in theory but in practice. A horse does not care for your title. It responds to patience, to a steady nerve, and to quiet confidence. These were the very virtues being embedded in her character, the building blocks of a soul being prepared for something, though no one yet knew what. This deliberate, loving concealment was not a rejection of her birthright. It was a masterclass in building a foundation so solid, so unshakable, that no future storm could ever crack it. As the seasons turned and the quiet child grew into a thoughtful young woman, the delicate craft of her character could be glimpsed in the small, fleeting moments that occasionally flickered across the television screen. You would see it not in a grand speech, but in a gentle, watchful glance during a rare carriage ride with her grandmother at the Royal Windsor Horse Show. While others might have been overwhelmed by the spectacle, the young Lady Louise seemed to be absorbing something deeper, the duty and quiet dignity her grandmother carried. Her life was a fascinating paradox. She occupied the wildly unique position of being the youngest granddaughter of a living, breathing icon, yet her face was largely unknown to the very public over whom that icon reigned. She was a Windsor, attending family Christmases at Sandringham and summer barbecues at Balmoral, a silent witness to the sweeping historical dramas and private heartbreaks of her family. She saw it all from a unique vantage point, close enough to touch the flame of history, yet sheltered enough not to be burned by it. Her education was a perfect reflection of this balance. At St. Mary's School, Ascot, a Roman Catholic day and boarding school for girls, she wasn't a princess in a gilded cage. She was a student who quietly excelled in her studies, her passion for English literature revealing a deep, empathetic curiosity about the human condition, about worlds beyond her own cloistered one. She was learning to see the world through the eyes of others, a skill that would prove to be a far more potent tool of leadership than any lesson in protocol. This was not a young woman being shaped by constitutional duty. This was a young woman becoming profoundly human, her empathy and her strength growing quietly, like the deep roots of an ancient oak, preparing her, though no one could have predicted it, for a single moment that would change everything. And when that moment of profound, life-altering grief arrived, it did not come for her directly, but for the grandmother she adored, and it tested those roots like a violent, unexpected hurricane. When the solemn, heart-stopping news from Balmoral silenced the world in September 2022, the carefully constructed wall of privacy around Lady Louise seemed to dissolve overnight. She was no longer a distant, protected figure. She was a granddaughter in the raw, unedited grip of mourning. The world, in its own grief for Queen Elizabeth II, suddenly looked to the family, and in the process, they truly saw Louise for one of the first times. We watched her, alongside her brother James, Viscount Severn, as she stood in a moment of silent, solemn vigil beside her grandmother's coffin in the vast, echoing stillness of Westminster Hall. The cameras, for once, were not intrusive so much as reverent, capturing the quiet dignity of a young woman saying a final goodbye. Her head was bowed, not in a performative display of sorrow, but in a moment that felt deeply, achingly private, even as it was shared with billions. There was a profound grace in her stillness that spoke louder than any eulogy. It was a visual echo of her grandmother's own famous motto, a heartbreaking demonstration that grief is the price we pay for love. In that moment, cloaked in black, her composure a heartbreaking tribute, the cocoon of her quiet upbringing transformed into a clear, visible strength. The nation did not just see a royal, they saw a lovely, poised young woman who was part of their collective national story. It was the moment the chrysalis cracked, and a curious, captivated public began to wonder what and who might emerge. That brings us back to the true heart of our story, the moment our hook foretold, the sudden emergence that left even King Charles III himself, a man who has seen every twist and turn of royal drama, utterly stunned. The scene at the Guards Polo Club was, on the surface, one of comforting tradition. The afternoon sun was a warm golden disk in a cloudless sky, the perfect backdrop for a charity event supporting causes close to the royal family's heart. The clinking of champagne glasses, the hum of polite, well-heeled conversation, the distant thunder of hoofbeats. It was a symphony of familiar, privileged sounds that had formed the soundtrack of 1,000 such afternoons. The Prince of Wales was on the field, mallet in hand, his focus entirely on the game. The Princess of Wales, a vision of effortless style, was in the royal box, her attention alternating between her husband and her children. Everything was perfectly, predictably, beautifully normal. This was the very reason the shock was so seismic. When the dark car arrived, it was a moment of pure cognitive dissonance. The figure who stepped out and moved with a quiet, graceful deliberation across the grass was Lady Louise. but a version of her no one had ever seen before. She was 19 years old, on the cusp of her final year at St. Andrews University, where she was studying English, and she had chosen this exact public moment to shed her protective skin. For years, she had navigated the gradual, challenging journey of treatment for an esotropia, a condition where one eye turns inward. A private medical matter she had borne with a quiet fortitude that was as much a part of her public image as her love of carriage driving. But on this day, she was no longer navigating. She had conquered. Her gaze was direct, clear, and startlingly powerful. It was a visual metaphor so potent it felt scripted by a master dramatist. The girl who had been content to be a quiet observer was now asking the world to look directly at her. The polo match, the charity, the celebrities in the crowd, all of it faded into a soft focus blur. A collective whisper rustled through the enclosure, a wave of shock and admiration that was palpable. The change was not merely physical, it was the total integrated projection of a new, fully formed presence. King Charles, who had been following the match from a separate vantage point, was reportedly informed of his niece's arrival and its extraordinary effect by a senior aide who, according to a source, was almost breathless in his description. "Sir, you need to see this," the aide is rumored to have murmured. When the king's gaze found her, a rare look of genuine, unfiltered astonishment flickered across his face. He had seen her only weeks before during a quiet family gathering at Windsor. He had seen the quiet student, the helpful granddaughter, the protective sister. He had not seen this. A composed, serene, and quietly commanding young woman, whose very posture, ramrod straight, yet fluidly graceful, seemed to channel a golden age Hollywood starlet thrust into the 21st century. It was as if the very essence of the Windsor women, the steady resilience of the late Queen Mother, the quiet dedication of Princess Anne, and the heartbreaking glamour of a young Diana, Princess of Wales, had been distilled and filtered through the lens of a new, modern generation. The king, a man whose entire life has been a waiting game for his destiny, looked upon his youngest niece and saw, perhaps for the first time, not a protected child, but a potential future. The air crackled with an unspoken question that now haunts the halls of palace advisors. What exactly do we do with her? If you're enjoying this journey into the world of the royal family, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Hunny Palace, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next royal story. Now let's continue. The emotional aftershocks of that day in Windsor did not simply dissipate with the evening shadows. They rippled outward, touching every corner of the family she was now so firmly, so vividly a part of. One can only imagine the quiet, knowing glance between Prince Edward and Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, as they watched the public finally catch a glimpse of the masterpiece they had spent 2 decades painting in the privacy of their own home. For them, this was not a sudden transformation, but a deliberate unveiling of a character they had nurtured with painstaking care. But for others in the family, the reaction was more complex and emotionally layered. For the Princess of Wales, whose own journey from a commoner to the future queen has been a masterclass in navigating the treacherous currents of public adoration and scrutiny, there was, reportedly, a sense of quiet, empathetic mentorship. According to a source close to the palace, Catherine, who has long shared a warm bond with her husband's cousins, looked at Louise that day with an expression of deep understanding. She recognized the burden and the power of a transformative public moment, the way the world suddenly projects a narrative onto you, and you must learn to inhabit it without losing yourself. In Louise's poised literary soul, Catherine may well have seen a kindred spirit, a young woman whose strength comes not from a desire for the spotlight, but from a rich, well-constructed inner life. The most poignant resonance, however, the one that still brings a lump to the throat, is the imagined conversation that can never happen. What would Queen Elizabeth II have made of this moment? The little girl who rode alongside her in the Balmoral Hills, who learned to handle the reins of a pony and a carriage with the same quiet, unflinching focus her grandmother had, was now stepping into a new kind of carriage, one pulled not by horses, but by the inescapable weighty expectation of history. The late Queen had a special fondness for the Wessex family, a respect for the sanctuary they had built away from the corrosive glare of the mainstream media. She saw in Louise, perhaps, a flicker of her own younger self, a spare, a girl who loved horses and the countryside, a soul who never expected to be thrust into a central role, yet who would be prepared if duty called. The last photograph they shared, a sweet, candid moment from the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, now feels like a silent benediction, a passing of a quiet, invisible torch of service and strength from one generation to the next. The woman who was the steady heartbeat of the nation for 7 decades would have looked at this poised, beautiful, and profoundly capable granddaughter with nothing but silent, overwhelming pride. Her legacy was not just in the institutions she upheld, but in the quiet resolve of the young woman standing on the polo field, a living testament that the values of the past could bloom into the most stunning flower of the future. The raw emotion of that moment was not a solitary bloom, but a flower with deep roots, drawing its strength from a soil rich with historical echoes. This is how the royal family's story truly lives and breathes, not in the dry annals of historians, but in these poignant, poetic parallels that connect one generation to the next. The unveiling of Lady Louise on a polo field carried with it the whispers of 1,000 stories. One must, inevitably, draw a breath and think of another warm day on another set of grounds, the sun glinting off the River Dee at Balmoral, where a young Princess Elizabeth was photographed by a doting father, her face open and serene, years before a crown would change her life forever. There is a similar quiet radiance, a sense of a life being lived fully and privately before duty demands its public pound of flesh. The parallel that sends the deepest shiver, however, is a more recent and heartbreaking one. The world once gasped in a similar way when a young Lady Diana Spencer, a girl who loved ballet and children, stepped into the public consciousness, seemingly from nowhere. But there is a crucial, and in this case, hopeful divergence. Diana's emergence was that of a lonely, innocent girl, thrust into a machine she barely understood. Louise's is the emergence of a young woman whose protective fortress was built with love, by a family who had learned from the tragic mistakes of the past. Where Diana was raw vulnerability, Louise is sheltered strength. The ghost of that past tragedy does not haunt this new story. Instead, it illuminates it, showing the world how much this family has learned about protecting its most precious souls. The past is not repeating itself. It is being redeemed, one careful, loving decision at a time, culminating in a young woman who is neither a victim nor a rebel, but something entirely new. A quiet, self-possessed master of her own destiny. This revelation, so artfully executed, did not just stun a king. It sent a seismic tremor through the very architecture of the modern monarchy. A silent, elegant reshuffling of the pack was perceptible only to the most astute of royal watchers, a quiet crisis of potential that must now be grappled with by the grey men in suits who manage the firm. For decades, the slimmed-down monarchy model has been an article of faith for King Charles, a vision of a core team of senior working royals that is lean, efficient, and cost-effective. The plan has always been neat and orderly. The Prince and Princess of Wales at the centre, supported by the Princess Royal and the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, with the Duke of Kent and Princess Alexandra gracefully stepping back. It was a structure designed for a small, dedicated core. The sudden, dazzling emergence of Lady Louise throws that neat, orderly plan into beautiful, compelling chaos. She is not a senior working royal. She does not hold an HRH style in the active, working sense, and yet, in the span of a single afternoon, she has captured the global imagination with a soft power that no amount of strategic planning could ever manufacture. She is the ultimate trump card that no one knew was in the deck. Palace courtiers are now reportedly in a state of quiet, frantic recalibration. The question is no longer if Lady Louise can be an asset to the monarchy, but how to best deploy a figure of such profound, understated magnetism. She is, according to a source speaking to a prominent royal correspondent, a solution to a problem we didn't know we had. The public appetite for her is insatiable, but it is an appetite for her quiet dignity, not cheap celebrity. She is the anti-Sussex, a figure who commands global attention without a single interview, a single tell-all book, or a single public complaint. She is proof that in a world of endless noise, silence, when it is finally broken, is the most powerful sound of all. Her position on the balcony at the next Trooping the Colour will be dissected with the intensity of a geopolitical summit. What patronages will she choose? How will her deep passion for literature and the arts be channeled? The palace advisors, who are masters of protocol and precedent, find themselves in uncharted territory. She is a constitutional anomaly, a non-working royal whose personal stock is soaring past that of some working members. This places the king in a fascinatingly modern dilemma. Does he bend the rules of his own slimmed-down model to harness this quiet power for the nation, or does he let a once-in-a-generation natural asset remain a private citizen, a glittering jewel the crown can see but cannot wear. The silence from the palace on this matter is deafening, a sure sign that the grand strategic game is afoot. As we move towards our climax, the speculation about what exactly this future will look like intensifies into a poignant, swirling dance of possibility. The options before Lady Louise are not just career choices. They are divergent paths for the future of the crown itself, each more compelling than the last, and none more fraught with symbolic meaning than the path back to the stables. The late Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, a man not given to sentimental pronouncements about many, had a deep and abiding pride in his youngest granddaughter's skill with carriage driving. He watched her compete with a fire in his eyes that few other things could ignite. He reportedly bequeathed his beloved ponies and his priceless, intricately designed driving carriage to her, a passing of the torch, or more accurately, the reins, from one dedicated equestrian to the next. This was no casual gift, it was a final lesson. He saw in her the same gritty, focused resilience he himself possessed. The possibility that Lady Louise might one day represent her country in the Olympics, perhaps even in a sport so steeped in her grandfather's memory, is a narrative so potent, so emotionally resonant, it feels as if it has already been written by a screenwriter with a taste for poetic justice. To see a young royal, not draped in jewels and sashes, but in a simple team jacket, competing with quiet, fierce determination on a world stage, that is a modern image of royalty worth more than 1,000 balcony waves. It is a dream her mother has subtly hinted at. A quiet ambition that would honor a grandfather's legacy while simultaneously redefining what a 21st century princess can be. But the quiet pull of the life of the mind is an equally powerful force in her story. She has not chosen a path of idle privilege. She is a student of English literature at St. Andrews University, the very same academic crucible where the Prince and Princess of Wales found love. Her choice of subject is deeply revealing. English literature is the study of the human condition, of complex motives, of grand tragedies and quiet victories. It is the discipline of those who seek to understand the world not through strategy, but through empathy. This is not a young woman preparing to be a figurehead. She is preparing to be a thinker. Sources close to the family have often murmured with a tone of deep respect that she is the cleverest of the Queen's grandchildren, a quiet intellectual whose emotional intelligence far outstrips her years. The future possibilities, therefore, are not binary choices between a horse and a book. They may, and likely will, fuse into a new model of a royal woman. Imagine a future where the Princess Royal, the hardest working royal of her generation, is not succeeded by a carbon copy, but by her niece, a woman who delivers a quietly powerful speech on child literacy at a global summit, who stands as a patron of a charity with a genuine intellectual understanding of its mission. A woman who can discuss the themes of a classic novel with a room of academics as easily as she can calm a spooked horse. This is the crucible of the climax. A young woman standing at a crossroads, where every path is gilded with history, every option a potential legacy. The world is not just watching to see what she will do. It is holding its breath, waiting to see who she will become. And in the end, when you strip away the titles and the history, the strategy and the speculation, who is Lady Louise Windsor becoming? The answer, delivered in the breathtaking visual climax of our story, is devastatingly simple. A woman whose very silence has rewired the power dynamics of the most famous family on earth. The most powerful moment of that day at the polo field was not a word, for there were none. It was not a gesture, for she was still and self-contained. It was a look. It was the moment her eyes, clear, deep, and lit with a quiet, knowing intelligence, met the gaze of the king. In that fleeting second, captured in a long-lens photograph that would ricochet across the globe, a silent conversation took place. It was not the look of a granddaughter seeking approval. It was not the look of a junior royal deferring to a monarch. It was the serene, unbreakable look of a young woman who had found her power. Not in demanding a role, but in becoming so undeniably herself that a role must now be created for her. The king's stunned expression, which we began this story with, was not just about her physical transformation. It was the shock of recognition. He was looking at the monarchy's invisible, unpolished diamond, which had suddenly, and without asking for permission, chosen to reveal its own flawless brilliance. In a family often characterized by the loud, chaotic clash of egos, here was a young woman who had conquered the world by doing absolutely nothing except being completely, authentically, quietly herself. Her power is not constitutional, it is existential. She has inherited not a title but a presence. And in that single, silent look, she told the king, the nation, and the world a truth we will not soon forget. The most profound revolutions often begin without a single shot being fired. Just a young woman opening her eyes and letting the world finally see her. And so, the story of Lady Louise Mountbatten Windsor leaves us not with a neat, tidy resolution, but with a deeply beautiful, lingering question. What does the future hold for the king's quietest niece? The paths before her shimmer with 1,000 possibilities, a kaleidoscope of a life that could go in any magnificent direction. She might, reportedly, follow in the footsteps of her cousin William and her aunt Catherine, and remain in the hallowed academic bubble of St. Andrews for a few more precious years, deepening that keen literary mind away from the flashbulbs. Sources whisper of a young woman who is not in a hurry, who understands that real power, the kind that endures, is built slowly. The military, a traditional path for Windsors, is unlikely, not for a lack of courage, but because her entire life has been a gentle but firm subversion of royal tradition. Her path will be her own. She might, as some believe, become the monarchy's most potent secret weapon. A non-working royal whose soft power is so immense that she quietly supports the crown simply by existing as a paradigm of grace, intelligence, and duty. She may write, she may compete, she may curate art, champion literacy, or become the silent, steel-spined matriarch of a new generation. The quiet glue holding the family together as her grandmother did for so long. The one certainty is that she will do it on her own terms, a testament to a mother's fierce love and a father's quiet devotion. The little girl who entered the world in a silent crisis, who fought for her first breath, has become a young woman who now takes the world's breath away. She is not just a royal, she is a promise whispered from the stables of Windsor to the lecture halls of St. Andrews, a promise that the future of this ancient institution might just be safe, not in the hands of the loud and the obvious, but in the steady, gentle hands of the quietest Windsor. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to Hunny Palace, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which part of Lady Louise's journey touched you the most? We would love to hear from you. Until next time, take care.
Hello everyone. तो दोस्तों आज की इस वीडियो में हम एक लोगो बनाने जा रहे हैं जो कि मेरे ही चैनल का है, जिसका नाम है हनी पैलेस। हनी पैलेस एक स्टोरी चैनल है जिसमें हम देखेंगे प्रिंसेस के स्टोरीज़, लॉयर्स के स्टोरीज़, ऐसे ऐसे बड़े बड़े सेलिब्रिटीज़ की स्टोरीज़, वो भी इंग्लिश में। ठीक है, तो अब दोस्तों से रिक्वेस्ट है कि आप अगर इस चैनल पे नए हैं तो काइंडली इस चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर लें और बेल के आइकन को ऑल पे प्रेस कर लें ताकि इस तरह की वीडियोस की नोटिफिकेशन अब तक आती रहे। चलो शुरू करते हैं अपनी आज के लोगों को। फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल हम यहाँ पे एक राउंड शेप लेके आते हैं। राउंड शेप को यहाँ पे हम एडजस्ट करके, ठीक है, इसे बीच पे लेके आएंगे, बिल्कुल बीच में सेंटर में से रखेंगे और इसका ही एक डुप्लीकेट लेयर बनाएंगे। फर्स्ट लेयर को जाके लॉक करेंगे और सेकंड लेयर को यहाँ पे हम बिल्कुल बीच पे रखेंगे। ठीक है, और इसका कलर हम चेंज करेंगे, यहाँ पे रेड कलर। ठीक है, और दोबारा से इसको हम डुप्लीकेट करके फर्स्ट लेयर को हमने यहाँ पे लॉक कर देना है। ठीक है, फिर से हम इसे सेंटर पे लेके आएंगे। सेंटर पे लेके आने के बाद इसका कलर हम वापस से इनेबल करेंगे। अब हमने इसी को क्या करना है, यहाँ पे इनर शेडो दे देना है। यहाँ पे देखें इनर शेडो, और यहाँ पे इसको हम शेडो दे देंगे। ठीक है, दोनों यहाँ पे आ गए। अब इसका भी हमने क्या करना है, इसको भी लॉक कर देना है। लॉक करने के बाद यहाँ से हम प्लस पे क्लिक करेंगे, यहाँ पे टेक्स्ट लेके आएंगे। लेकिन टेक्स्ट को लेके आने से पहले यहाँ पे टेक्स्ट का कलर हमने चेंज करना है, क्योंकि हमारा जो शेप का कलर है वो वाइट है, तो इसका हम रखेंगे ब्लैक। यहाँ पे डबल टैप करेंगे टेक्स्ट वाले ऑप्शन पे। यहाँ हम लिखेंगे क्या, हनी, सिर्फ हनी। ठीक है, और कुछ नहीं। हनी लिखने के बाद हम इसका फ़ॉन्ट चेंज करेंगे। ए बी फ़ॉन्ट पे क्लिक करेंगे। ए बी फ़ॉन्ट पे क्लिक करने के बाद माय फ़ोन में जो कि मैंने कुछ अच्छे फ़ॉन्ट्स डाउनलोड किए हुए हैं, उनमें से कोई भी एक फ़ॉन्ट मैं यहाँ पे चूज़ करूँगा, लाइक दिस वन या तो दिस वन। कोई भी एक फ़ॉन्ट मैंने चूज़ किया यहाँ पे। ठीक है, ये फ़ॉन्ट मैं यहाँ पे रखूँगा, ये फ़ॉन्ट है। ठीक है, अब इसको हमने क्या करना है, इसका कलर यार मुझे ये अच्छा नहीं लग रहा, तो मैं इसका कलर येलो करके इसको यहाँ पे शेडो दे दूँगा। ठीक है, शेडो दे दिया। और यहाँ से शेडो की ना मैं थोड़ा सा, नहीं ये मज़ा नहीं कर रहा, ऐसे बैक आएंगे। ठीक है, ये शेडो इसको आ गया। और इसको स्ट्रोक भी दे के देखते हैं क्या। चलो ये बेस्ट है। ठीक है, यहाँ पे ये ओके। और इसका एक डुप्लीकेट लेयर बनाएंगे। डुप्लीकेट के बाद यहाँ पे हम इसे लेके आएंगे। मैं इसे यहाँ पे लेके आता हूँ और यहाँ पे इस पे लिखेंगे पैलेस। ठीक है, ये पैलेस। इसका कलर हमने क्या करना है, रेड कर देना है। नहीं, रेड नहीं करना, वाइट करेंगे इसका कलर हम। ये हमारा लोगो है, ठीक है, जो कि हनी पैलेस के नाम से है। और इसमें कुछ और भी चीज़ हमने ऐड करनी है। हम यहाँ पे प्लस पे ऊपर क्लिक करेंगे, शेप्स पे क्लिक करेंगे। यहाँ से शेप मैनेजमेंट है, यहाँ से हमने स्टार को सिलेक्ट करेंगे। ठीक है, ये स्टार है, यहाँ पे आप देखें। इस स्टार को हमने यहाँ पे ला के रख देना, बीच पे। ठीक है, बीच पे ला के रखने के बाद हमने क्या करना है, इसको दे देना है शेडो, जैसे हमने टेक्स्ट को दिया था। ये शेडो आ गया इसको। और इसको दोबारा से डुप्लीकेट बना के हमने यहाँ पे साइड पे रख देना है, यहाँ साइड पे। और सेकंड को भी सेम यही, यहाँ पे। ये हमारा हो गया एक डिज़ाइन रेडी। और ये हमारा लोगो है जो कि हमने क्रिएट किया हम अपने चैनल के लिए। अब क्या करेंगे, इन तीनों स्टार को हम एक साथ मर्ज करेंगे। मर्ज करने के बाद यहाँ पे ओके क्लिक करेंगे और इनका एक डुप्लीकेट बनाएंगे, कॉपी लेयर। अब इसको हमने यहाँ से उल्टा कर देना है, यहाँ पे। ठीक है, और इसका कलर हम करेंगे येलो। कलर हो गया येलो। और इनको शेडो देके ब्लैक का। ये हमारा हो गया कंप्लीट लोगो। तो दोस्तों, आपने बता देना है कि ये लोगो कैसा है। लोगो अच्छा है, क्रिएट सही किया गया है। आपने इसका लाजमी से कमेंट में आंसर देना है। ठीक है, ये आज का हमारा लोगो है। और इसका हम बैकग्राउंड चेंज कर देते हैं। बैकग्राउंड चेंज करने के बाद इसका एंड रिज़ल्ट यहाँ पे आप लोग देख सकते हैं, इसका एंड रिज़ल्ट। ये हमारा लोगो कम्प्लीटली रेडी हो चुका है। तो वीडियो को लाइक करें और चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें इस तरह के अच्छे अच्छे लोगोस के लिए और बैनर्स के लिए।